Hi, everyone. I wanted to say hello and welcome you to another episode of the Wise Way podcast. The topic today is very forward, very on topic for what's everything that's going on today, which I think many of our audience will relate and answer some questions there. And it's related to the AI noise and how it's impacting in accounting firms from the and all the bookkeeping firms as well, how it's changing the industry. So yeah, that's what I want to tackle with Ed, who's been in the industry for over 40 years. So I want to get his point of view on what used to be and what is now, what he's seeing. So I'll go with some questions. So as I was saying, you've been in this profession for over 40 years. You've watched accounting come to the other side of every technology shift stronger than before, but now everyone's talking about AI doing the same thing. Where does this moment sit for you compared to everything you've already seen? And what does that experience tell you about what's coming?
Perhaps to give it some context, I'll give you some history, and then we can build it from there. I was at university in the late 70s and early 80s, so I came out to work in the early 80s.
Mm,
And back then, computers were just coming into the business world, and people were saying to me, even when I was at uni, don't do accounting because computers will take over your job
mm,
and there won't be any paper. It'll be all on the computer. And it's been over 40 years, and in that time, I've seen massive changes. Right, when I first had my first job, we used to do a lot of the things on spreadsheets, manual spreadsheets on paper, and then that then
imagine.
went to yes, then the mainframes came in where really large organizations had massive computers. They used to take up, a whole floor of a building. And in the accounting world, we used to then have a room where there's two girls in there that would do the data. They'll input the data into the computer. So the accountants would do their work. They'll code uh, a bank statement, for example, or prepare some journals, and they put it in the in tray of the girls that data inputted this information into the computer, and they print out a profit and loss, a draft profit and loss and balance sheet. And then you'd go through it and you'd put some more journals through and you put it back in and it'll come out. Then we had our own computers, desktops,
Yeah.
but it will still be cumbersome because we needed floppy disks to save, the information onto the floppy disk, and it wasn't in a smaller firm. It wasn't readily available, so it was like a computer room. But you went in there and you did the work yourself, and then you print it out and you take, and everyone took turns and that kind of thing with the smaller firms. But that's gone from there to then desktop accounting like MyOb, and then now to the cloud. So in that time, when I first started, we needed around 15 accountants per $1 million in turnover for an accounting firm. And we used to do around an EBITDA of around 30 odd percent, 25, 30%. And then as the computers came in, we needed less accountants. So it dropped
Yeah.
from 15 to about nine per million fees. But we also used to have a secretary or a typist that used to type all the tax returns. So they would roll it, that you draft up the tax returns manually, and they'd type up the tax returns. Today there's no typist. There's not a single typist. We used to have one typist for every two accountants. So that's now gone. And and then when desktop accounting came in, it dropped it down to about five accountants per million in fees. And now we're into the next phase, which is artificial intelligence, and it'll drop it down to about two. But
Yeah.
in all that time, accounting firms were saving money because they didn't have as many staff, um, but they were still making around 30, 25, 30, 35% EBITDA. So the profits remain about the same. And of course, the fees to the clients got more uh, well, that didn't go up. A lot of the times it came down because we were able to do the work much, much quicker. Now, with artificial intelligence,
Mm,
the transactional things will get done. So it's very good at transactional things, but the relationships will still be there with the clients. So they'll always need, that relationship, someone to talk to, someone to guide them, that kind of thing. And I think that relationship will still be there, but it will be less of the grinding, the transactional, and more of the relationship.
definitely. And you know, it's fair to say that everything has changed ever since you started working while you were at uni and you've gone from computers, clouds, offshore, and it's been you built a whole different firm back to this day. Would you consider yourself, out of all the technology, as a late adopter or an early adopter? And if you understood this, I think you did long while ago, what would it take someone to be a late adopter and to not want to engage in all of this AI and to not want to get on the basically wagon of, technology and embracing all of this in their firm?
That's a great question because for the older accountants who like myself, I was more of a middle adopter. I
Mhm.
never came into early because I'm not that way inclined. So I used to surround myself with computer literate
Yeah.
accountants who enjoy that side. So, if you've been part of Wize, you know that we build teams that complement each other. If you don't hire somebody the same as you, but you hire someone that complements you. That if everyone has strengths and weaknesses, so you know your strength, and then you hire someone to take up your weakness so that you complement each other. So you end up with you know the product is more than the sum of its parts, so to speak. So for accountants out there at the moment, the change is massive, and we've gone from we used to send in our tax returns manually in the mail to lodgement by ELS. And a lot of accountants were resisting that. And even up to, even 5, 10 years ago, there was some laggards that were still sending in tax returns, but not many, but, very, only a handful. But the world is changing a lot, and you got to be with it and, be a part of that. Otherwise, you're going to get left behind, and you're going to become less competitive. And the world is changing, and we need to change with it. And that's just life. And if you look at the world as it stands today,
Yeah.
industries have disappeared, but they've been replaced by other industries. And as long as our economic growth, and I'm talking about Australia, of course, if our GDP can be maintained at about 2.5, 3%, that economic growth will keep unemployment below 5%. And unemployment below 5% is full employment. And when that happens, then the country functions well.
Yeah.
And we've been achieving that. So even in our car industry, which for years was getting subsidised, when we closed it down in South Australia and 6,000 people lost their jobs, they got absorbed into other industries because there were new industries coming through and absorbing it. It's just a change in what we do, and that will continue. And we need to adapt. We need to adapt with our environment.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you kind of answered my next question that I was, after listening to you, going to ask. But um you know that these changes create lots of noise, and they bring like uncertainty and worry, and that people worry about their jobs, and they start thinking that they're not skilled enough because there are other technologies that could take over them, that could make them redundant. So you, as a leader, as the owner of a firm, of an accounting, bookkeeping, even a law firm, what would you how would you handle this when your team is going through that right now with AI? Because that's a very hot topic for everyone listening, that they might have insecurity and uncertainty and they need to be a leader and take the reins of it. What would you say?
Well, it comes down to the leader. For example, in my organization, we've not, let anybody go because, because of technology. We've
Yeah,
always been putting staff on, not letting them go. And I'm talking about Shannon Naylor now,
yeah,
because our audience is mainly accounting firms. And I guess it was incumbent on me as a leader to keep growing our firm, to keep growing the size of our firm. So then, it created the work that that kept everyone employed. And I take that responsibility very seriously because it's not just making more money in that.
yeah,
It's just that, as as technology uh, is upon us, we the skill set that's required from the staff changes, and we need to be able to grow the firm so that as technology helps us produce work more quickly,
yeah,
that the workload is increased so that the teams are maintained, but then their roles might change a little bit. So
yeah,
we move their roles around. Just to give you an example, um, as you know, we set up the ideal team structure for
yeah,
accounting firms, and we use our ideal team structure to recruit. And so we have the client manager who is a people person who does all the communication with the clients, and then the production the production manager is someone who manages people, a very skilled, knowledgeable, but manages and trains the team. And then we have the accountants coming through, who I call it the grinders, minders, and finders, who are the people that do the work. And in Chananella, we had this situation where there's a particular, I know I won't use the name, of course, but there was this particular person who's very, 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 very good at production, at doing the work. And I had to, and she was very resistant in moving to a senior production manager role. And I had to sit down and talk to her that, look, the industry's changing. The grinding work that you're doing, it's going to be taken over by, at the moment, computers, but it'll be taken over by artificial intelligence. And the time that you spend on doing the work is going to reduce. And so you've got to progress to managing people and training the young ones coming through. And if you don't do that, you're going to make yourself obsolete.
yeah.
And to her credit, she did. She stepped up, and then she's now managing people. She's now production manager. But she needed help, of course. She needed training. She needed support, and so forth. And that's what we have. We, as the leaders of our organisations, have to recognise the changes and to change the positions as we go along, and as technology, comes to the forefront.
Yeah. And I love your explanation because I do see the value in jumping or making yourself obsolete is like a choice that you also make. So there's a lot of leadership involved in how you handle these conversations and how you either you do it by brute force or you want to take the time and have the conversation and take it as a mostly as a suggestion, but it's also a recommendation that's going to make yourself more useful and just to embrace it and not resist it. But you said something very important at the beginning of our conversation that I wanted to really hone in, and it was the fact that the best firms, and you know that what firms are taking care of is building the relationship and not only transaction. And now that AI is doing the transactional side or coming for that side of things, not completely replacing, but it's kind of wanting to take that part. What do you feel like is the moment where advisory stops being optional? Would you say that is a truth, or do you think that's still could hang on further?
Okay, so let's define what advisory is, because it's a term that's bandied around and can get quite confusing. For accountants, I see our role as a CFO, a chief financial officer, not as a CEO, chief executive officer for our clients, but we should act as a CFO for our clients. What does that mean? It means that, we should be getting in front of our clients and doing advisory, but CFO advisory. We should be doing budgets, cash flows, having AGMs with the clients and tax planning, asset protection, those kind of things that which are in our area of expertise. And a very easy one is that often I see firms just doing a transactional service for their clients.
Yeah.
They'll prepare the tax return and send it to their clients for signature, but they won't have a meeting with them and go through their situation. They don't do any tax planning. They're just simply transactional. I think those firms are going to struggle. And if you continue to deliver your service in a transactional way, you're going to really struggle. So you've got to then be able to transition out of that style into more of a relationship advisory advice based service. And it's a small change, but it's massive in terms of if you've been doing something in a particular way and trying to change from that way of doing things, that's massive. But also the people that you have within your organization may be the wrong people in the wrong roles, mainly. There may need to be a lot more training involved to change. But it's got to be led by the leader. The leader needs to make the change and then implement the change across the team. And if the leader doesn't do it, then it won't happen.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned there's something very, I feel like it's crucial for all of this because there's a lot of people who are going to want to hire in this day and age. And you know that now that transactional skills are, being the second best thing that you can do right now, and that you have to be a people person. How does all of this change when you are like practically for how firm owners should be hiring and developing their junior staff right now, that they have more people skills rather than technical skills?
It can be trained, that skill. So it's around communication. You don't have to be a real people person. You
Okay.
just need to be able to communicate. And of course, accountants is an industry that's high on trust. So
Yeah.
clients trust accountants. And as long as you're knowledgeable and you can communicate, then you can address that issue. And that can be accomplished by training and education
Yeah.
and playing. And some staff will learn that quicker than others. But the thing that really is of an advantage to an accountant is because they are trustworthy,
Yeah.
they're conservative, and they generally do have a good relationship with their clients, and the clients has this bond with them. So it but being able to communicate is not something that's natural. You've got to really educate someone on it. And in our industry, and this occurs in every other industry, by the way, Claudia,
Yeah,
it's
I'm sure.
whether you're a doctor or a computer, probably computer people are the worst. They talk about gigabytes and all that kind of stuff, and nobody knows what they're talking about. And we talk about debit loan accounts and things like that, which and debtors and creditors, which the audience doesn't understand. So that needs to be taught to the staff. So it's not such a big leap forward really for certain people, but there are people who don't like it. So you need to be able to separate those people out, because if you put someone into a role that is difficult for them, so it's like swimming against the tide, then they get tired very quickly and they tend not to do what they're supposed to do because
Yeah.
it's hard for them. So it is also true that you've got to find someone that likes to talk, likes to communicate.
Yeah.
And those who don't like to talk and don't like to communicate, they're not going to succeed as well.
Yeah. I wanted to ask one last question because I'm curious. You mentioned trust, and I feel like that is super important when building client relationships. So, with all of this AI and using all of this, technology and getting things more automated and all of that, how do you protect that trust you've spent years building with a client so they don't feel like they're getting an accountant's, that they're getting actually an accountant's judgment rather than a machine's output?
Well, meetings, having face-to-face meetings like we're having now,
Hmm.
and you've got to, like today's technology is incredible. We can do it on Zoom. So if the clients couldn't come into the office, the best way, of course, is in the office face to face because you can see body language, you can see all sorts of things. But the next best is by Zoom. And you should be able to have a Zoom meeting with an individual, build that relationship. There's a bond that gets created by just being in the same room, whether it's a Zoom room or a real room. There's still a bond that builds. So you need to increase that side of your relationship. Have more rather than less. The problem is, Claudia, is that most accountants are focused on production
Yeah.
and they want to finish this tax return and get on to the next one, and then finish the next one and then get on to the next one, but they're not thinking about the relationship. And I talk about visible money and invisible money.
Mm.
Visible money is doing the tax return and getting paid for it. That's visible money. That's important, of course. I call that the P&L play. But there's invisible money. It's the goodwill that you have with your relationship.
Yeah.
And the only way you can invest into that goodwill and maintain that client, because you want to increase the lifetime value of that client. The longer they stay with you, the more valuable they are. And that's worth money, although it's invisible. You can't see it. But, if they leave you, then you lose all the visible money.
Yeah.
But we don't spend enough time investing into that in the invisible money, which is the relationship. And you need to do that. I know it doesn't bring visible immediate money straight away, but it brings the investment is long term because they'll refer you friends and family members and so forth. So, but most accountants don't focus on that. They just focus on getting the work done to
Yeah.
get on to the next job. And we need to, if you're a client manager, you need to change your focus and be aware that there's both the visible and invisible value to that client.
Yeah, totally. That makes perfect sense. And I feel like that's a great way to put it. I love the invisible money and the visible money analogy because there's a lot of people who avoid advisory in a way and just, building a client relationship because they feel like there's just so much technical stuff that they can do. And that's already the help and the job that they were supposed to do. But they don't see the other side of this, which is keeping your client and nurturing your client relationship. But yeah, thank you, Ed, for answering my questions for today. I feel like this has been such an insightful conversation, and it's going to put a lot of noise to bed because I know that there's a lot of firms out there struggling with AI and feeling like they're missing out on something and they're behind. And I feel like it's such a good topic and that we could go on for hours. But thank you for your time and for your wisdom. Always appreciate it.
You're most welcome and looking forward to the next one.